of the night was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the low, constant drone of fluorescent lights. This was the new soundtrack to my life, a monotonous symphony of despair that had replaced the clamor of the newsroom. My name is Ethan Hayes, a ghost of a man hiding from a past that had destroyed my career as a journalist. I was now the night shift worker at a forgotten gas station, the last stop, a lonely outpost before the vast, dark expanse of the Blackwood Creek National Forest. The previous owner, an old hermit named Silas, had left behind a framed list of rules. At first, I had laughed them off as the ramblings of a crazy old man. Rules like, the moon is not always the moon. Never look directly at it on a Tuesday, and the man with the missing eye always pays in exact change. Never argue. I had dismissed them, but tonight, the laughter had a hollow sound. Tonight was a Tuesday, and a strange truck had just pulled up to pump 3. The game was about to begin. Will Ethan follow the rules, or will he learn the terrifying truth behind the Blackwood Creek National Forest? Stay with us to find out. And remember, if you're enjoying the terror, don't forget to like, follow, and subscribe to the channel for more stories that will keep you up at night. The hum of the fluorescent lights was a low, constant drone, a sound that had replaced the roar of truck engines in my life. It was a monotonous, soul-crushing music, and I was its only audience. My name is Ethan Hayes, and this is my second week working the night shift at the last stop, a gas station that lived up to its name.
It felt like the last stop on the road to nowhere. A final flicker of civilization before the vast, dark emptiness of the Blackwood Creek National Forest swallowed you whole. He used to chase stories. Big stories.
Stories that shook foundations and exposed truths. I was a journalist, a truth seeker, until one story, one single headline, blew up in my face and took everything from me. Now I chase the ghost of the man I used to be, and I find him every night in the reflection of this grimy gas station window, serving gasoline to truckers and cheap coffee to insomniacs. I was trying to outrun my past, but this place, with its perpetual twilight and air of forgotten things, felt like the perfect place for a ghost to hide. The station itself was a relic. The pumps were old, the credit card readers were finicky, and the interior smelled of stale coffee and desperation. The previous owner, an old man named Silas, had left the place to his nephew, who couldn't wait to get rid of it. The only things Silas left behind were a framed list of rules, scribbled in shaky handwriting, and a sense of unease that clung to the air like a persistent fog. I'd found the list on my first day, taped to the register. I'd laughed at the time, dismissing them as the ramblings of an old hermit.
Rule 10. The bell on the door is your only friend.
Always listen to it. Rule number 2. The moon is not always the moon. Never look directly at it on a Tuesday.
Rule 3. The man with the missing eye always pay in exact change.
Never argue. Rule number 4. If a customer asks for a change for a $2 bill, give them what they ask for. All currency is real. Rule number 5. Never ask them their names.
Never tell them your.
The list went on, each rule more nonsensical than the last. I had chuckled, imagining the old man arguing with imaginary customers. But the laughter had a hollow sound now. Tonight was a Tuesday. The moon was a swollen, bruised-looking orb, casting long, twisted shadows across the empty lot. I had spent most of the shift restocking the shelves, the rhythmic clink of cans providing a thin shield against the overwhelming silence.
A familiar sound, the deep rumble of an old diesel engine, broke the quay.
A rusty Ford pickup, its paint peeling like sunburned skin, pulled up to pump number 3. A tall, gaunt man with a face like chiseled granite stepped out. He was dressed in a simple denim jacket, and a wide-brimmed hat cast his eyes in shadow. He didn't seem to notice the bitter cold. He just stood there, motionless, his back to me, the fuel nozzle in his hand. My internal monologue, the cynical, exhausted voice of the old Ethan, told me to ignore him, to go back to my inventory. But something about the man, the unnatural stillness of his posture, held my attention. A prickle of unease ran down my spine, a feeling I hadn't felt since I was chasing a story I shouldn't have. After what felt like an eternity, he finished, walked to the door, and the bell, my only friend, gave a soft, tinny chime. He stood before me, the shadow of his hat still obscuring his eyes. He didn't speak. He simply reached into his pocket and placed a single smooth black stone on the counter. It was unnaturally cold, absorbing the light from the fluorescent bulb above and somehow making the air around it feel colder. I stared at the stone, then at the man. His lips were thin, pulled into a line that was neither a smile nor a frown.
My mind raced.
That's not legal tender, my brain screamed. It's just a rock. But the old man's list, a document I had laughed at, flashed in my memory. Rule number 4, all currency is real. My cynicism warred with a gut feeling, a deep-seated survival instinct I hadn't realized I still possessed. It was the same feeling that had told me to kill a story once, to stop pursuing a truth that would get me killed. I had ignored it then. I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. I looked at the rock, then back at the man. That'll be $23.12, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. He nodded, a barely perceptible movement in the shadows. He didn't speak a word. He just turned and walked out, his footsteps making no sound on the linoleum floor. I watched him get back into his truck and drive off into the darkness, the rusty Ford dissolving into the night as if it were a figment of my weary imagination. I picked up the stone. It was heavy, and a strange, almost magnetic coldness radiated from it. It wasn't just a rock. It felt ancient, imbued with a strange, silent power. I put it in the register drawer, next to the small stack of quarters and dimes, a new kind of currency in my desolate kingdom. As I closed the drawer, my eyes fell on the framed rules again. I read them over, not with a cynical smirk, but with a growing sense of dread. The bell on the door had chimed. The man had paid in a form of currency I was not prepared for. And it was a Tuesday. The moon, a grotesque swollen eye in the sky, was still there, and I, against my better judgment, had looked at it. A shiver that had nothing to do with the cold air shot through me. The hum of the fluorescent lights suddenly felt less like a drone and more like a warning. I wasn't just a night shift worker anymore. I was a keeper of secrets, and I had just made my first transaction with the things that lived in the dark. The rest of the night passed in a slow, agonizing crawl, punctuated by the bell on the door. A normal trucker, smelling of gasoline and cheap coffee, came in for a sandwich. A young couple, their car's engine sputtering, bought a bottle of oil. Their normalcy was a stark contrast to the encounter with the man and the stone, and it made the dread feel all the more real. The framed rules seemed to stare at me, each one a cryptic command from an unknown authority. I found myself instinctively following them, a new paranoia taking root in my mind. When the moon slipped behind a bank of clouds, I felt a strange sense of relief, as if a great unseen eye had finally turned away. As the pre-dawn light began to bleed into the sky, painting the world in shades of bruised purple and gray, another car pulled in. It was a sleek black sedan, the kind of car that looked out of place in the desolate landscape of Blackwood Creek.
The driver, a man in a crisp suit, stepped out.
He was immaculately dressed, his hair slicked back. He had a strange, almost predatory smile on his face, but it was his eyes that caught my attention. One was dark, almost black, and the other a milky, pale white, as if it had been bleached by some terrible internal light. My stomach twisted. This was the man from the list.
The man with the missing eye.
He wasn't missing an eye, it was just different. The bell on the door chimed, and he entered. "Morning," he said, his voice a smooth baritone. He walked straight to the coffee pot, pouring himself a cup. "Rough night?" he asked, his smile widening, the pale eye seeming to fix on me with an unnatural intensity. "Just a long one," I replied, trying to keep my voice even. Rule number 5. Never ask them their names.
Never tell them your.
I kept my mouth shut, forcing myself to be a silent, impassive observer. He came to the counter, placing a $5 bill on the counter for the coffee. "A man came through here tonight," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Paid you with a little something, didn't he?" My heart hammered against my ribs.
He don't know what you're talking about. He lead, the word feeling clumsy and thick in my mouth.
He chuckled, a low guttural sound that didn't reach his eyes. "Don't you?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. Old Silas's rules are getting to you, aren't they? They're not suggestions, boy. They're a pact. A treaty.
And you're the new warden.
I swallowed hard, the word warden echoing in my head. I wasn't a warden. I was a failure, a disgraced journalist trying to disappear. He took a sip of his coffee. Heard you looked at the moon last night, he said, a malicious glint in his pale eye. Hope you enjoyed the view. He then reached into his pocket and produced a handful of coins, placing them on the counter with a soft clatter. Exact change, he said, just as the rule states. I stared at the coins, a collection of quarters, dimes, and pennies. The total was exactly $2.16, the cost of the coffee. My hands trembled as I took them. You're a fast learner, he said, and for the first time, his smile seemed genuine. But there's more to this game than you know.
Silas Brock à Roulons.
Asked a name. They tore him apart, piece by piece. You don't want that, do you? He finished his coffee in a single gulp, turned, and walked out without another word. The bell chimed once, a final chilling note, and he was gone. I was left alone again, standing in a small circle of light, holding a handful of coins that felt heavy with a horrifying truth. The rules weren't just the eccentricities of an old man. They were the key to my survival, and I was just beginning to understand the terrible, beautiful truth they held. The gas station wasn't a stop on a road to nowhere. It was the gate to an ancient, terrifying world, and I, Ethan Hayes, was its new gatekeeper. The fear, a cold knot in my gut, had now settled into something more insidious, a low, constant thrum of adrenaline. It was the same feeling I'd had when I knew a story was about to break, a buzzing anticipation mixed with a profound dread of what I was about to uncover. Only this time, the stakes weren't my career, they were my life. I was no longer a journalist hunting for a scoop. I was prey, a warden, a pawn in a game I didn't understand. I spent the next day, my off day, holed up in my small rented room above a diner in the town proper. The black stone from the collector and the handful of coins from the man with the pale eye resting on the dusty dresser. They were tangible proof that my mind hadn't conjured these events. I tried to do what I used to do best, research. I pulled up old news articles about Blackwood Creek, searching for anything about Silas or the gas station.
He found nothing.
I scoured local forums and historical society websites, looking for mentions of strange creatures or local legends. The closest thing I could find was a forum post about a shadow stalkers tribe and a vague, half-remembered story about a curse. The post was quickly deleted, and the user's account was gone, a digital ghost in the machine. That night, back at the station, the air felt different. Thicker. The silence was heavier, and the shadows seemed to writhe with a life of their own. I found myself instinctively checking the moon, a pale sliver in the sky, and felt a strange sense of relief that it wasn't a Tuesday. I kept the old rules list pinned to the wall, a sacred text now, and I studied them like a detective looking for clues in a crime scene. A car pulled up, and the bell chimed. It was a sleek, modern vehicle, a sharp contrast to the rusty pickups that usually frequented the place. The driver, a beautiful woman with striking pale eyes and a shawl of what looked like woven shadows, stepped out. Her movements were fluid, graceful, almost too perfect. She floated into the station, and the air around her seemed to grow colder, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and something else, something sweet and cloying, like a funeral bouquet. She smiled at me, a mesmerizing, almost hypnotic expression. "You're new," she said, her voice like wind chimes, a sound that was both lovely and deeply unsettling. I said nothing, remembering rule number 5, never ask them their names.
Never tell them you.
She seemed to find my silence amusing. "My name is Alara," she said, breaking her own rule. "And you, I believe, are a man with a heavy past. A man who seeks answers." I stiffened, the blood draining from my face. My journalistic instincts, buried for so long, flared to life, but they were quickly overshadowed by a primal fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," I lied again, the phrase becoming my new mantra.
She looked, allo, melodic sound.
"Of course you do. I can see it in your eyes. The guilt. The doubt. the yearning for a truth you can no longer find in your old world. She glided to the coffee pot, pouring a cup with an elegance that seemed out of place in the grimy station.
Your friend, the one with the palai, calls you a warden.
He is correct.
You are a gatekeeper, Ethan.
You just don't know which gate you're guarding. She placed a hand on the counter, her touch sending a jolt of icy coldness through the cheap formica. You have a choice, she continued, her voice dropping to a whisper. You can continue to follow the rules, to be a pawn in a game of ancient lore. Or you can break free. I can help you. I can tell you what this place is. I can give you the truth you so desperately crave. All you have to do is break one rule.
Look at the moon on a Tuesday.
I will be there.
We will talk.
She finished her coffee, her pale eyes fixed on me, the intensity of her gaze almost overwhelming.
Just one rule, Ethan.
One small act of rebellion, and you will be free. She reached into her pocket and placed a small bone-white compass on the counter. It was crafted from what looked like a human finger bone, and the needle was made of a dark obsidian shard that seemed to absorb all light. The needle, instead of pointing north, trembled and vibrated, pointing vaguely toward the deep, dark woods of the national forest. This will show you the way, she said, her voice a promise and a threat all in one. The way to a truth that will set you free, or the way to a truth that will destroy you. She left as silently as she had come, her shawl of shadows seeming to melt back into the night. The bell on the door didn't chime. I was alone again, left with a cryptic warning, a strange compass, and the knowledge that I was being watched. My heart pounded, but beneath the fear, a small spark of something else ignited. It was the familiar feeling of a story, a dark, terrifying, beautiful story, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the old pull, the old hunger, the old need to know. My journalistic instincts, once a tool for uncovering corruption, were now the only thing that could save me from the darkness gathering in Blackwood Creek. I picked up the compass, its strange needle trembling in my hand. I was no longer just a night shift worker. I was an unwilling participant, and the game had just begun.
The bonne compass lay heavy on my palm.
Its needle, a sliver of obsidian, pulsed with a faint, internal light, quivering erratically. It pointed not to any cardinal direction, but toward the depths of the Blackwood Creek National Forest, the place where Alara's shadows seemed to have returned. The promise of answers, of escape, of a truth that I had spent my life chasing, was a powerful lure.
But the warning from the man with the palai. Silas broke a roulance.
They tore him apart, was a terrifying counterpoint. I tried to rationalize it all. The rules were a prank. Alara was a con artist. The men were just eccentric customers with strange habits. But the black stone and the bone compass were solid, undeniable proof. This was real. The next few shifts were a blur of nervous paranoia. I followed the rules with a religious fervor, my movements slow and deliberate. I gave the man with the missing eye his exact change, my hands trembling as I counted out the coins. I nodded silently to the collector when he paid with a small carved wooden bird that felt as old as time itself. I began to understand the rules not as arbitrary commands, but as a language, a series of rituals that maintained a fragile balance between my world and theirs.
One evening, a young man, a tourist in a shiny new sedan, pulled up.
He was talking on his phone, oblivious to the silence of the night and the oppressive weight of the forest. He came in for a bag of chips and a soda, and as he was about to pay, he noticed the list of rules I had tacked to the wall. He chuckled. "Crazy old coot, huh?" he said, pointing to rule number 4. All currency is real. What's that about? Does he think someone's going to try and pay with monopoly money? A cold dread seized me. It's just an old joke, I lied, my voice tight. He was a strange man.
The tourist looked, a loud, grating sound.
Yeah, well, I guess he wasn't expecting this. He pulled out his wallet and, with a flourish, placed a crisp $2 bill on the counter. "Change for this, please." My heart stopped. I stared at the bill, then at the man's oblivious, smiling face. A voice, ancient and cold, whispered in my mind, "Give them what they ask for. All currency is real. We don't have change for that, I stammered, my body rigid with fear.
We don't carry $2 bill. The touristess smile faltered.
What? That's ridiculous. It's a real bill. Here, I'll even show you. He was about to turn the bill over to show me the back when the fluorescent lights flickered violently. The air in the station grew heavy, the scent of damp earth and rotting leaves returning with a vengeance. The tourist paused, a look of confusion on his face. He looked at the window, then back at me.
Hey, what is going on?
The sound of his voice was a trigger. A low growl, a sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, filled the air. Outside, the shadows in the forest seemed to stretch, to coalesce into new and terrible shapes. I could feel a pressure building, a palpable malicious force gathering just beyond the glass door.
My mind screamed.
Give them what they ask for. All currency is real. But I had made a choice. I had hesitated, had tried to rationalize the rules away. The pact was broken. A deep, inhuman roar shook the station to its foundations. The glass door rattled, and the tourist screamed, dropping his $2 bill and backing away. He scrambled for the door, his eyes wide with a terror that mirrored my own. As he fumbled with the handle, a dark shape, tall and impossibly thin, moved past the window with a speed that defied logic. The tourist didn't see it. He didn't have to. He felt it. A cold, chilling dread that made him forget everything else. He tore the door open and scrambled into his car, his tires squealing as he sped out of the lot, a human scream fading into the night.
He was left alone again, standing behind the counter, my body shaking.
The $2 bill lay on the floor, a mundane piece of paper that had almost been the end of me. I had broken a rule. I had failed the test. And in the oppressive silence that followed, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the creatures in the dark were now looking for me. I had not been a warden. I had been a temporary solution, and I had just proven to them that I was a liability.
The game was over. The hunt had begun.
The silence after the tourist's departure was not a relief, it was a promise. A terrifying, whispered agreement that something was coming for me. I stood frozen behind the counter, the crumpled $2 bill a mocking testament to my failure. The rules were not a game. They were a covenant, an ancient treaty between two worlds, and I had just violated it. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs.
He snatched the $2 bill from the floor, my fingers shaking, and shoved it into the pocket of my jean.
It felt like a ticking time bomb. I looked at the old list on the wall, the words now shimmering with an otherworldly significance. The rules weren't a guide to survival. They were a ritual, a delicate dance that kept the wolves from the door. And I, in my arrogance and fear, had just stumbled. The fluorescent lights flickered once more, a single violent pulse that plunged the station into darkness.
My breath itched. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through my adrenaline-fueled eyes.
I fumbled for the light switch, my hands slick with sweat, but it was dead. The silence returned, this time absolute, and with it came the suffocating presence of something vast and ancient. A low, guttural growl echoed from the back of the store, from the dark hallway leading to the storage room. It was not the sound of an animal, but something far worse, a sound of shifting bone and grinding sinew. I backed away from the counter, my eyes fixed on the blackness. The air grew impossibly cold, and a putrid coppery smell, like old blood, filled my lungs. A shape emerged from the shadows. Tall, impossibly thin, and with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. It moved with a jerky, disjointed grace, its form a patchwork of shadows and bone. It was the creature that had terrified the tourist, but now it was here in the station, and it was looking for me. Its head, a grotesque parody of a deer's skull, tilted to the side, its empty eye sockets fixed on me.
He swallowed a scream, my mind screaming with a different kind of horror.
This wasn't a monster from a movie. This was a skinwalker, a creature from myth, from the deepest, darkest corners of Native American folklore, and it was real. Its existence was the proof of everything I had been told, and everything I had refused to believe. The skinwalker took a step forward, its feet silent on the linoleum floor. It wasn't menacing me directly. It was sniffing the air, its movements deliberate and predatory. Its head tilted again, and it took a step towards the register. I watched, paralyzed, as it extended a long skeletal finger towards the framed list of rules. The black stone from the collector and the bone compass from Alara, still on the counter, seemed to thrum with a low, silent energy in its presence. The creature's voice, when it came, was a raspy, hissing whisper, a chorus of overlapping voices that sounded like dry leaves scraping against each other. "The pact is broken," it hissed. "The warden has failed." It was speaking to me, through me, a telepathic assault that rattled my very soul. It knew. It knew that I had hesitated, that I had tried to break their fragile peace. It saw the $2 bill in my pocket as a symbol of my betrayal. A new shape emerged from the darkness of the hull, a smaller, quicker form. It was another skinwalker, this one more canine, with a low, snarling head and long, vicious claws. It darted around the first one, its eyes, two pinpricks of malevolent red light, fixed on me. It was hunting, and I was the prey. I scrambled backwards, my hand brushing against the cold, metallic surface of a shelving unit. My fingers found something solid, a heavy wrench I had been using to tighten a loose bolt. It was a pathetic weapon against creatures of myth, but it was all I had. The canine skinwalker lunged, a flash of motion so fast I barely registered it. I raised the wrench, a futile panic gesture, and then something happened. The bone compass, still sitting on the counter, flared with a brilliant, blinding white light. A sound like 1,000 bells ringing at once erupted in the small store, a deafening, painful tone that seemed to shake the very fabric of reality. The skinwalkers recoiled, their forms dissolving back into the shadows with pained, inhuman shrieks. The light from the compass faded, and the sound died away, leaving an eerie, ringing silence in its wake. The fluorescent lights flickered back on, and the station was once again bathed in the familiar, sterile glow. The air was cold, but the coppery stench was gone. The only evidence of the terrifying encounter was my shaking body and the wrench still clutched tightly in my hand.
I stumbled to skunte, my mind reading. The compass. Elara's gift.
It hadn't just pointed away, it had protected me. But for how long? I had broken the rules, and I had seen what they would do to a warden who failed. The compass was a temporary reprieve, not a permanent shield. The hunt was still on, and I was still the prey. I looked at the framed list on the wall, the rules no longer a joke, but a lifeline, a map to a world I was now a part of.
The clock on the wall read 4 heures du matin.
In 2 hours, dawn would break, and the normal world would return, a fragile illusion in the face of the darkness I had just witnessed. I had to survive until then. I had to understand. I had to learn the language of the rules before they were my epitaph. My life as an investigative journalist had ended in a lie. My new life as a warden in Blackwood Creek had just begun with a terrible truth. And I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that the most terrifying part of the story wasn't the monsters. It was the realization that I was just like them, another piece in a cosmic puzzle, a gatekeeper guarding a truth that the world was not ready to see. The bone compass, now resting on the counter, hummed with a quiet, internal power. I stared at it, my heart still a frantic metronome against my ribs. The wrench, a ridiculous piece of metal, lay beside it, a pathetic trophy from a battle I hadn't won. The skinwalkers were gone, their forms dissolved back into the shadows they had come from, but their presence lingered like the stench of a freshly dug grave. The fluorescent lights, now a steady buzzing drone, felt like a fragile barrier against the darkness that was gathering outside. I was alone again, but the solitude was now a terrifying thing, a vacuum where silence was no longer a comfort, but an omen. The rules, the seemingly nonsensical scrawls of a dead man, were a liturgy now, a series of holy commandments I had to follow to the letter. I had failed the first test, and I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that there would be no second chance. I locked the door, a futile gesture against things that could walk through walls and bend shadows to their will. I looked at the bone compass, its obsidian needle still trembling, still pointing towards the deep, dark woods of Blackwood Creek. Elara's words, her promise of a truth that will set you free, echoed in my mind. She had given me a weapon, a shield, but she had also left me with a choice. To follow the rules, to be a pawn, or to break them, to seek a truth that could destroy me. I pulled out the $2 bill from my pocket. It was no longer just a piece of paper. It was a catalyst, a trigger, a symbol of a broken pact. I had to get rid of it. I had to make things right. But how? The rules were silent on what to do when a rule was broken. A new thought, a terrifying one, began to form in my mind. Maybe the rules weren't just about survival. Maybe they were part of a larger mechanism, a clockwork system that kept the supernatural world at bay. Maybe the pact the skinwalkers spoke of was a delicate balance, and my actions had just tipped the scales. As the sun began to rise, painting the sky in a bruised palette of orange and purple, I felt a new kind of dread. The day was coming, the time when the normal world would reassert itself, but I knew with a chilling certainty that I would never be able to go back to it. I was no longer a journalist, no longer a night shift worker. I was a warden, a gatekeeper, and the gates were now ajar. I knew I couldn't just throw the $2 bill away. It was a mark of my failure, a symbol of the broken trust. I had to understand what I had done, and I had to find a way to fix it. My journalistic instincts, the part of me that had spent a lifetime chasing a good story, were now the only thing that could save me. I had to find the truth behind the gas station, behind the rules, behind the pact. I took out my old, battered reporter's notebook from my backpack. The pages were filled with my old life, notes on a corrupt politician, interviews with whistleblowers, the names of sources who had trusted me. I crossed out the old headlines and with a shaking hand, began to write a new one, the Blackwood Creek Chronicles. It was a story no one would ever believe, a story that would either save my life or be my final epitaph. I started writing, meticulously documenting everything.
The Blackstone, The Bonne Compass, The Encountewi the Skinwalker, The Terrible Truth of the Rule.
I wrote about the man with the pale eye, the warden, and the alluring, dangerous woman, Elara, who had given me the compass. I wrote about the low guttural growl, the smell of blood and wet earth, and the feeling of a world tearing at the seams. I wrote until the sun was high in the sky, until the first car of the morning pulled up, a normal car driven by a normal person. I had to put the notebook away, to shove the compass and the stone and the $2 bill into a hidden drawer under the register. I had to pretend that everything was normal, that the night had been just another shift at a gas station. But I knew the truth. The world had changed. And I, Ethan Hayes, was no longer just a spectator. I was a character in a horror story, and the prologue had just ended. My journey into the heart of the darkness of Blackwood Creek had just begun, and the rules of this new world were simple: survive and learn the truth. My journalistic instincts, the very thing that had ruined my old life, were now the only thing that could save my new one. I was no longer running from the truth. I was running towards it, and I had a feeling that the truth was far more terrifying than the lies I had left behind. The next few shifts were a tense, nerve-wracking exercise in self-control. Every time the bell chimed, I tensed, my hand instinctively reaching for the wrench. But it was just truckers, families on vacation, and weary travelers. The normalcy was a facade, a thin veil covering the horrors of the night. I found myself obsessively following the rules, my mind a frantic checklist of the bizarre commandments. I watched the moon every night, my mind a constant calendar of the days of the week, making sure I never looked directly at it on a Tuesday. I handled the strange currencies with a quiet reverence, accepting the carved wooden bird, the handful of human teeth, and the smooth, cold stones with a silent nod. But the fear was a constant companion, a ghost whispering in my ear. I was living on borrowed time. The compass, now hidden in the drawer, hummed with a low, constant energy, and I could feel its pull, a subtle, irresistible tug towards the forest. I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the answers I sought were out there. One night, the man with the pale eye, who I had come to think of as the warden, returned. He came in for a coffee, his smile as predatory as ever. He paid with his usual exact change, his pale eye fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "You failed," he said, his voice a low, knowing whisper. "The pact is broken. They will be looking for you now."
He said nothing, my mind racing.
"The compass," I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them.
"What is it?"
He chuckled, a low guttural sound. A gift from Alara, he said.
The Weaver. She wants you to break free.
She wants you to join her side. She wants you to see the world as it truly is, a tapestry of lies and forgotten truths. Join her side. I asked, my voice a desperate whisper. What does that mean? It means, he said, his voice dropping to a serious, chilling tone, that there are two sides to this war, Ethan. The Wardens, like me, who maintain the pact, and the Weavers, like her, who want to tear it all down. They want to open the gates, to let the chaos in. And you, with your broken pact, are now the key to either side's victory. He finished his coffee, his smile returning, a cruel, knowing expression. Choose wisely, Warden. Your life, and the fate of this world, depends on it. He walked out without another word, the bell on the door chiming a final ominous note. I was left alone again, standing in the sterile glow of the gas station, with a new terrifying truth. This wasn't just a game of survival. It was a war, a cosmic battle between two ancient forces, and I was caught in the middle. The rules were not just to keep me safe, they were the terms of a treaty, a delicate balance of power. And I, in my ignorance, had just become a pawn in a battle that had been raging for centuries. I looked at the drawer, at the hidden compass, and a new resolve hardened in my mind. I was a journalist. I was a seeker of truth. I wouldn't be a pawn.
You wouldn't be a warden.
I would find my own way, my own truth. I would use the compass, I would follow its pull, and I would find the answers that would either save me or destroy me. My new life, the one I had tried to outrun, was now a story I had to write, a story I had to live. And I had a feeling that the climax of this story was a long, dark, and terrifying road away. The bone compass had become an obsession. Every time the gas station was empty, I would pull it out from its hiding place, watching the obsidian needle tremble and pulse with a faint internal light. It was no longer just a cryptic gift, it was a siren song, a silent invitation to a truth I was both terrified of and desperate for. Alara's words, the way to a truth that will set you free, or the way to a truth that will destroy you, played on a loop in my mind. The Warden's warning, that I was now a key in a war between two ancient factions, only fueled my need for answers. I couldn't be a pawn.
You wouldn't be.
I had to understand what was at stake. My off day couldn't come fast enough. I spent the entire morning preparing, packing a small backpack with water, a few protein bars, my old reporter's notebook, and a small antique camera I had bought on a whim.
The camera, a relique from a different era, felt strangely right.
It was a tool for capturing truth, for seeing the unseen, and in this new terrifying world, I needed all the tools I could get. The sun was high in the sky when I set out, the compass clutched tightly in my hand. Its needle, which had been a frantic, trembling mess inside the station, now pointed with a steady, unwavering certainty towards the heart of the national forest. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and damp earth, and the sounds of birdsong and rustling leaves were a welcome change from the silent, suffocating dread of the gas station. But as I delved deeper into the woods, the sounds of nature began to change. The birdsong grew more sporadic. The rustling leaves felt less like wind and more like the movement of something unseen. The forest floor, once soft with pine needles, became a tapestry of strange, gnarled roots and smooth black stones that felt unnaturally cold to the touch. The trees themselves seemed to twist and contort, their branches forming grotesque, grasping shapes in the canopy above. The compass was my only guide, its needle a beacon in the growing twilight of the woods. It led me to a small winding creek, its water a dark, inky black. The creek bed was littered with strange white stones that looked like bone, and a low musical hum seemed to emanate from the water itself. This was Blackwood Creek, the place that had given the town its name, and I had a feeling that the creek itself was a part of the pact, a part of the tapestry Alara had spoken of. Following the creek, the compass led me to a small clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a single ancient oak tree, its branches so thick and gnarled they looked like the limbs of a sleeping giant. Carved into the bark of the tree, in a language I didn't recognize, were a series of symbols that looked hauntingly familiar. They were the same symbols on the black stone the collector had given me. My heart pounded. This was it. This was the place. The center of the pact, the heart of the war. As I approached the tree, a figure emerged from behind it. It was Alara the Weaver, her shawl of woven shadows shimmering in the late afternoon sun. She was not in her human form, not entirely. Her skin was a pale, translucent white, and her eyes, the beautiful pale eyes that had captivated me at the gas station, were now black, bottomless pools of obsidian. Her hands, long and thin, were tipped with long black claws. "You came," she said, her voice no longer like wind chimes, but a low, sibilant whisper. "I knew you would. Your journalist's hunger for truth is a powerful thing." I stood my ground, my hand instinctively reaching for the antique camera in my backpack. "What is this place?" I asked, my voice shaking despite my best efforts to keep it steady. "What is the pact?"
She smiled, a cruelle, beautiful expression.
"This is the nexus," she said. "The place where the veil between worlds is thinnest. The pact is a fool's bargain. An agreement made by men who were afraid of what they could not understand. They gave us this land, this forest, and in return, they asked us to stay in the shadows, to only appear in their liminal spaces, their gas stations, their empty roads, their forgotten places." She gestured to the symbols on the tree.
"These are the rules, Ethan."
"The shackles that bind us. The wardens, like the one you met, are our jailers. They enforce the pact. They keep the peace. They keep us from being free." "And you want to break the pact," I said, a dawning horror filling my mind. "You want to tear the veil down."
"Terry down." She looked at DRY, rasping sound. "No.
We want to mend it. We want to make it whole again. For too long, the two worlds have been at war, a silent war of shadows and whispers. But the veil is thinning. A great and terrible power is trying to break through. And the wardens, in their blind adherence to the rules, are only making it easier for it to enter."
"What great and terrible power?"
I asked, a new kind of dread creeping into my heart. "You will see," she said, her black eyes fixed on me with an unsettling intensity. "The $2 bill you refused. The one that was a symbol of your betrayal. It was not a test, Ethan. It was a key. A ritual. And by refusing it, you have opened a door. A door that leads to the truth. A truth that will either save us all or destroy everything you hold dear." She extended a long, black-tipped finger towards me.
"Now, make your choice, Warden. Do you follow the rule and stand with your gelée? Or do you follow the truth and stand with me?"
The clock is ticking. The veil is thinning. And the great and terrible power is waiting for its key. The bone compass, still in my hand, began to vibrate wildly, its needle spinning like a mad thing. The symbols on the tree began to glow with a faint internal light, and the air around us grew thick with an ancient crackling energy. The humming from the creek grew louder, a deep resonating sound that seemed to be shaking the very ground we stood on. I was no longer a pawn. I was a key, and the two sides of this war were now fighting for control of me. I had to choose, and I had to choose wisely, for the fate of two worlds depended on it. The air in the clearing crackled with an ancient energy, and the humming from the creek had intensified into a deep resonant chord that seemed to vibrate in my very bones. Alara, no longer a woman but a being of shadow and bone, stood before me, her obsidian eyes a challenge. The bone compass in my hand was a live thing, its needle a frantic dervish, and I knew that every moment I stood there, paralyzed by fear and indecision, the veil between worlds grew thinner. I had come here for truth, for answers, but I had found something far more terrifying, a choice. My journalist's mind, trained to seek objectivity, rebelled. I couldn't simply choose a side in a war I barely understood. One side called me a warden, a jailer, the other, a key to chaos. I was neither. I was just Ethan Hayes, a man who had lost his way and stumbled into a nightmare.
"You won't be upon," he said, my voice barely a whisper against the growing roar of the creek.
"I won't choose a side in a war I didn't start." Alara's spectral lips curled into a smile. "Then you have already chosen, little journalist," she hissed. "Inaction is a choice, and your choice will bring ruin to your world." Her form began to shimmer, to fragment into 1,000 dancing shadows. The ancient oak tree, the nexus, began to writhe, its branches twisting and groaning as if in agony. The symbols on its bark flared with a malevolent crimson light, and from the black inky waters of the creek, a new sound emerged, a chorus of inhuman moans and whispers, the sound of 1,000 hungry mouths trying to speak at once. This was the great and terrible power she had spoken of. The Breacher. The entity that was trying to force its way through the veil. It wasn't a skinwalker, or a warden, or a weaver. It was a cosmic horror, a thing of pure chaos and hunger, and my refusal to act had given it an opening. A wave of intense cold washed over the clearing, a cold that wasn't from the air, but from the absence of all life, all warmth. The skinwalkers from the gas station, the man with the pale eye and the one with the obsidian stones, were not just enforcers of the rules, they were the guardians of this gate. The rules were their only weapon, and I, in my ignorance, had disarmed them. I stumbled backward, a primal fear seizing me. The moans from the creek grew louder, and from the surface of the black water, a hand emerged. Not a human hand, but a clawed black appendage, dripping with the inky fluid of the creek, its talons long and sharp as razors. It was a herald, a scout, a small piece of the terrible thing that was trying to break through. I looked at Alara, or what was left of her, a dancing collection of shadows. "Help me!"
He screamed, the last vestige of my pride and skepticism crumbling.
The shadows coalesced for a moment, and her voice, a dry whisper, filled the air.
The rule, Ethan.
The rules are not just a pact. They are a weapon. A ritual. Your knowledge of them is the only thing that can save you now. You have the key. You have the compass. The way is yours to find. With that, her form dissolved completely, swallowed by the darkness that was now radiating from the creek. I was alone, standing in a clearing with a single monstrous clawed hand stretching out of the water, and the roar of a cosmic horror trying to break through the veil.
My mind, a frantic collection of memory and fear, raced.
The rules. What did she mean? My refusal of the $2 bill was a mistake, a broken link in a chain. The $2 bill wasn't just currency, it was a ritual object, a key. And my refusal had opened the door. The compass wasn't a guide to a new truth, it was a key to a new pact, a new ritual. I had to use it. I had to reverse what I had done. I looked at the hand in the water, a single horrifying piece of the thing that was trying to enter my world. I looked at the bone compass, its needle still a frantic blur of motion. I had a choice. To run, to become another victim in a forgotten land, or to fight, to use the knowledge I had so foolishly dismissed, and become the warden I was always meant to be.
He ran to the edge of the creek, my feet slipping on the sleek, bone-white stones.
I took the bone compass in my hand, its coldness a stark contrast to the heat of my panic. I closed my eyes, and a new kind of voice, a quiet, reassuring presence that was somehow familiar, spoke to me. It was the voice of the compass, the voice of the pact, the voice of Silas. A contract must be fulfilled. A debt must be paid. I opened my eyes and looked at the $2 bill still crumpled in my pocket. I knew what I had to do. I had to complete the ritual. I had to fulfill the contract I had so foolishly broken. I had to pay the debt. I pulled the bill from my pocket, my hand shaking, and held it out over the inky black water. The clawed hand from the creek seemed to writhe, its talons reaching for the bill. A chorus of desperate whispers filled the air, 1,000 voices begging for the completion of the ritual. I dropped the bill, and as it hit the water, it didn't float. It didn't sink. It was instantly absorbed, a flash of green and black, and the clawed hand, with a final desperate gasp, sank back into the blackness of the creek. The moaning stopped. The humming ceased. The air, once thick with ancient power, was now just the quiet, ordinary air of the forest. The symbols on the tree returned to their dull, carved state. The bone compass in my hand went still, its needle now pointing north, a silent, humble tool once again. I had done it. I had fulfilled the contract. I had paid the debt. But I knew with a horrifying certainty that this was not the end. The breacher was still out there, waiting for its chance. The veil was still thin. And I, Ethan Hayes, was no longer just a man in a gas station.
Iwas Awardan, a keeper of the peace, and the war for the soul of this world at Juste Beguin.
The walk back to the gas station was a blur of exhaustion and adrenaline. The forest, once a place of lurking dread, was now just a forest again. The trees were just trees. The stones were just stones. But I knew the truth, a truth that no one else would ever believe. The rules, the seemingly nonsensical ramblings of an old hermit, were the key to keeping the world from tearing itself apart. I returned to the gas station, the familiar hum of the fluorescent lights now a comforting sound.
He sat behind the counter, the bon compass and the black stone from the collector now sitting out in the open, no longer hidden.
They were my tools now, my weapons. I was no longer a pawn. I was a player. The next few weeks were a strange, surreal dance. The skinwalkers returned, their visits a regular part of my night shift. But they were different now. The man with the pale eye, the warden, would give me a knowing nod and a look of quiet respect. The collector would place his strange artifacts on the counter with a silent acknowledgement of our shared purpose. Ilara, the weaver, would visit occasionally, her beautiful, pale eyes now filled with a strange mix of disappointment and reluctant respect. "You chose the easy path, Ethan," she would say, her voice no longer a threat, but a lament.
"You chose the known over the unknown, the cage over the freedom."
"I chose to protect the world I know," I would reply, my voice firm. "I chose to keep the peace. That is my purpose." I had found my new purpose, a new story to chase, a new truth to protect. The gas station was no longer a cage, it was a fortress. The rules were no longer shackles. They were my law, my creed, my very reason for being. My old life as a journalist, the life of exposing corruption and chasing down human stories, was over. My new life, as a warden in a forgotten land, had just begun.
The rule were a fragile peace.
The veil was still thin.
And the great and terrible power was still waiting, just beyond the edge of the world.
But I was ready. I had my compass. I had my rules.
He had my story.
And I would keep the gate. I was Ethan Hayes, and I was the warden of Blackwood Creek. The old rusty pickup truck sputtered into the gas station lot, its headlights cutting a feeble swath through the thick nocturnal fog. I watched it from behind the counter, my hand resting near the bone compass, a silent, comforting presence. It was a normal truck, and the man who got out was a normal man, tired, smelling of stale cigarette smoke and cheap coffee. He paid with a credit card, a mundane transaction that, a few months ago, would have been the entirety of my night. Now, it was a brief, welcome respite. He left, and the bell on the door chimed, a sound that no longer held the threat of the unknown, but rather the mundane rhythm of my new life. I felt a strange sense of peace, a quiet resolve that had replaced the constant, gnawing fear. My life was no longer about running from the truth. It was about guarding it. My journal, the one I had started on that first terrifying night, was now filled with meticulous notes. I had documented everything, the strange currencies, the different customers, the cryptic warnings. I had even started to discern a pattern.
The skinwalker, the wardens and the weaver, were not random monsters.
They were a part of a complex system, a delicate ecosystem of shadow and pact. The wardens, like the man with the pale eye, were the enforcers. They were ancient, unyielding, and their purpose was to uphold the rules at any cost. Their currency was always rooted in the natural world: stones, bones, feathers. They were a part of the earth, a part of the pact itself. The weavers, like Ilara, were the manipulators. They were graceful, seductive, and their purpose was to test the boundaries, to find the weaknesses in the veil. Their currency was often ephemeral: memories, truths, even a glimpse of the future. They were a part of the spiritual world, a part of the chaos that was always trying to break through. And I, Ethan Hayes, was the human element.
The warden in the middle.
My purpose was to understand both, to keep the balance, to ensure that the rules were never broken, and the veil was never torn. As the night wore on, a different kind of car pulled up. Not a truck, not a sedan, but a rusted-out van, its windows covered in a thick layer of grime. The bell on the door didn't chime. The door just opened with a low groaning sound, and a man stepped out. He was dressed in a tattered trench coat, and his face was a patchwork of scars and shadows. His eyes, two dark, bottomless pits, seemed to absorb the light from the gas station, and a deep guttural growl emanated from his chest.
Il t'encède, maillant dans un compas.
This was not a warden. This was not a weaver. This was something else. He walked to the counter, his movements slow and deliberate, and placed a single crumpled $2 bill on the counter. My heart pounded in my chest. He was a test. A new kind of test. "Change for this, please," he said, his voice a low, hissing whisper. I looked at the bill, then at the man's dark, impassive eyes. I knew what to do. I had learned the rules. I had paid the debt. The rules weren't just about giving him the change he asked for. They were about fulfilling the contract, about acknowledging the reality of his currency. I reached into the register and, with a shaking hand, gave him a small stack of coins. "Here you are," I said, my voice steady. "The change you asked for." The man looked at the coins, then at me. A flicker of something, of surprise, of a dark, predatory respect, crossed his face. He took the coins, a low, guttural chuckle rumbling in his chest. "You learn quickly, Warden," he said. "The $2 bill is just a test. The real question is, what would you do if I asked for something else?" He reached into his pocket and placed a small, dark object on the counter. It was a shard of obsidian, a piece of the same material as the needle of my compass. But this one was different. It was pulsating with a faint, malevolent red light, and I could feel its power, a dark, consuming hunger that was trying to tear a hole in my very soul. "This is the Breacher's gift," he said, his voice a triumphant whisper.
The key to the chaos.
The key to the end of the pact.
Take it, Warden. Embrace the chaos. Let the world burn.
I stared at the shard, then at the compass in my hand. One was a tool for peace, the other a weapon for destruction. One was a part of the pact, the other a part of the chaos. My journalist's mind, my need for truth and balance, screamed at me. I had a choice.
A terrible, final choice.
I looked at the man, his eyes dark, his smile cruel, and I knew what I had to do. I had to choose. I had to choose wisely. I was the keeper of the gate, and the gate was now open, and the two sides of the war were now fighting for control of me. The obsidian shard on the counter pulsed with a malevolent crimson light, and the air in the gas station grew thick with a palpable sense of dread. The man in the trench coat, a herald of the Breacher, watched me with a predatory glee, his dark eyes challenging me to make my choice. This was it. This was the final test. The $2 bill was a warm-up. This was the real game. My hand, still resting on the bone compass, felt the quiet, steady hum of the pact. The compass was a lifeline, a silent, ancient voice whispering the language of the rules. The shard, on the other hand, was a siren song of chaos, a promise of power and destruction.
My mind raced, recalling my note, my observation, my conversation with the Wardensen the Weaver.
The wardens, in their strict adherence to the rules, were rigid, unyielding. They were the law, but they were also a cage. The weavers, in their quest for freedom, were chaotic, unpredictable. They were the spirit, but they were also the fire that could burn the world down.
He was somewhere in the middle.
I was a journalist, a seeker of truth. My purpose was not to choose a side, but to find the balance, to ensure that neither side won, and that the pact, the fragile peace, remained intact. I looked at the obsidian shard, then at the man. "I choose neither," I said, my voice firm, my heart a frantic drum in my chest. "I choose the pact. I choose the rules. I choose peace." The man's smile faltered, a look of pure, unadulterated hatred replacing it. "Fool," he hissed, his voice a sound of dry leaves and splintered bone. "You have no idea what you have just given up. You have no idea what is coming for you." He reached for the shard, but I was faster. I snatched the bone compass from the counter, its needle now pointing directly at the shard, and slammed it down. The compass and the shard touched, and a brilliant, blinding white light erupted from their union. A sound like 1,000 bells ringing at once, filled the air, a deafening, painful tone that seemed to shake the very foundations of the world. The man screamed, a sound of pure agony, and his form began to dissolve, to fragment into 1,000 dancing shadows, just like a Lara. The Breacher's gift, the obsidian shard, shattered into 1,000,000 tiny pieces, and the malevolent red light was extinguished. The light from the compass faded, and the sound died away, leaving an eerie ringing silence in its wake.
The man was gone. The shard was gone.
The only thing left was the bone compass, its needle now pointing north, a silent, humble tool once again. I was left standing in the sterile glow of the gas station, my body shaking, my heart a frantic, panicked mess. But the fear was different now. It wasn't the fear of a pawn. It was the fear of a victor. I had won. I had chosen. I had protected the pact. A few moments later, the bell on the door chimed. The man with the pale eye, the warden, walked in, his face a mask of silent respect. He didn't say a word. He just placed a small silver coin on the counter, and in his pale eye, I saw a flicker of something I hadn't seen before. A look of gratitude.
A look of peace.
He had given me his seal of approval. I was no longer a pawn. I was no longer a new warden. I was a true warden, and the war was still raging, but I was now on the right side of it. I picked up the coin, its cool surface a comforting presence in my hand. I was a warden, a keeper of the gate, and the gate was now secure. The story of my life had changed, from a tragedy of a failed journalist to a legend of a man who stood guard against the darkness. And I was ready for whatever came next. The silver coin from the warden was a strange kind of burden. It wasn't just currency, it was a badge of office, a symbol of my new status. I had moved from being a pawn to a player, but the game was still afoot. The man in the trench coat, the Breacher's herald, was just the beginning. I knew, with a certainty born of chilling experience, that the chaos would keep knocking on the door. My nights fell into a rhythm of heightened paranoia and quiet purpose. The gas station was no longer just a job, it was my post, my fortress. I had memorized every rule, every nuance of the pact, and I had started to develop my own set of unwritten protocols. When a skinwalker came in, I no longer just followed the rules. I observed them, studying their movements, their mannerisms, trying to find the tells that would reveal their true nature. The warden's side, the rigid enforcers of the pact, always paid with tokens of the natural world. Stones, bones, carved wood.
The weaver's side, the chaotic tester of the veil, paid with things of the mind. A forgotten memory, a fleeting vision, a promise whispered on the wind.
My journal was now a Bible of the bizarre, a meticulously documented account of the war being fought in the shadows of Blackwood Creek. I had started to draw the symbols I saw on the artifacts, the patterns on the skinwalker's clothing, the strange formations of the stars on certain nights. The old journalistic hunger for truth was back, but it was no longer a thirst for headlines. It was a desperate need for survival, a need to understand the language of the enemy. One night, the bell on the door chimed, and a figure I hadn't seen since our confrontation at the Nexus walked in. It was Lara, the weaver, her shawl of shadows a living thing around her. Her face, the beautiful pale face I had first seen, was now a mask of cold fury. "You chose poorly, little warden," she hissed, her voice a low, sibilant whisper.
You chose the cage. You chose the past over the future. I stood my ground, maillant dans the silver coin from the ardent.
"I chose to protect this world," I said, my voice firm.
I chose peace over chaos.
She laughed, a dry, rasping sound that was more a lament than a laugh. "Peace? This is not peace, Ethan. This is a stalemate. A cold war. And the veil is thinning. Your pact is a rotten piece of old wood, and the Breacher is a tidal wave. Soon it will come, and your little gas station, your little rules, will be swept away in the flood." She walked to the counter and placed a small, dark object on the glass. It wasn't a stone, or a bone, or a memory. It was a photograph. A photograph of me, standing in front of my old editor's office, the day I had been fired. In the corner of the photograph, just barely visible, was the ghost of a man's face, a look of profound despair and sadness. It was the corrupt politician I had written about, the one whose suicide had ended my career. "This is my currency, Ethan," she said, her voice now a taunting whisper. "The truth you thought you had buried. The guilt you thought you had escaped.
Take it, Wardan.
And feel the weight of your choices."
Mai briscoe tin mai trois.
The photograph, a mundane piece of paper, was a weapon, a shard of my past meant to tear a hole in my present. My hands trembled as I reached for it, and for a moment, I was back in that old office, the smell of coffee and stale paper, the bitter taste of failure in my mouth. "Do not," a new voice, a quiet, ancient voice said. It was the warden, the man with the pale eye, standing just inside the doorway. He hadn't made a sound, and I hadn't heard the bell chime. "Her currency is a poison, Warden. It is a lie dressed as truth. It is a memory designed to destroy you." Ilara's eyes, the beautiful, pale eyes, flared with a malicious anger. "He is weak," she hissed. "He is haunted. His own past will be his undoing." The warden walked to the counter, his movements silent and deliberate, and placed a small, smooth, white stone next to the photograph. "The pact is truth," he said, his voice a low, unyielding rumble.
The rule are the law.
"Her lies are chaos. Choose, Warden. Choose what is real." I looked at the photograph, then at the stone. One was a lie, a poison from my past meant to break me. The other was a truth, a piece of the earth, a symbol of the pact that I had sworn to protect. My journalist's mind, the part of me that had always sought the cold, hard facts, screamed at me. I had to choose the truth, the pact. I had to reject the lie. I snatched the white stone from the counter, its cool surface a comforting presence in my hand. I slammed it down on the photograph, and a brilliant, blinding white light erupted from their union. The photograph, a memory of failure and regret, burst into 1,000 dancing motes of light, and the ghost of the politician's face, a look of profound sadness, was finally set free. The light faded, and the gas station was once again quiet. Ilara, her face a mask of silent fury, was gone. The warden gave me a single respectful nod, and without a word, he turned and left, a silent, powerful guardian of the night. I was left alone again, standing behind the counter, a white stone in my hand, a piece of my past finally put to rest. The war was still raging, but I was no longer fighting with my past. I was fighting for the future, and I had a feeling that the hardest battles were yet to come. The Breacher, the great and terrible power, was still out there, waiting for its chance, and I, Ethan Hayes, was the only thing standing in its way. My victory over Ilara's trick was not a celebration, it was a lesson. The war wasn't just about the physical world. It was a war for the mind, for the soul. The Weaver's currency wasn't just a metaphor for lies. It was a literal assault on the psyche, a weapon of guilt and regret meant to break my resolve. My triumph, in choosing the truth of the pact over the lie of my past, had hardened me. I was no longer just the warden of a gas station. I was the guardian of my own mind. The silver coin from the warden and the white stone from the previous night were now joined by a growing collection of artifacts.
A carved wooden bird, a handful of human teeth, a smooth, black stone, and now, a white, bone-like stone.
Each piece was a part of the pact, a piece of the world I was now sworn to protect. My journalist's notebook was filled with meticulous drawings of each one, a strange kind of Rosetta Stone for the language of the supernatural. My quiet routine was shattered one night by a new kind of visitor. A young woman, no older than 20, her face pale and her eyes wide with a manic terror. She didn't come in to buy gas or coffee. She ran to the counter, her breath a series of desperate gasps, and she held out a small old-fashioned music box. "He's coming," she whispered, her voice raw with fear. "He's chasing me. Please. You have to take this. It's the only thing that can stop him." I looked at the music box, then at her terrified face. She was not a skinwalker. She was human, a lost soul, a victim. But her plea, her music box, felt like a test, a new kind of game I didn't understand. My rules, my pact, were silent on how to deal with a human caught in the crossfire.
The bell on the door shimmered, a sound of dread.
The man in the trench coat, the Breacher's herald, stepped inside. His face, a patchwork of scars, was twisted into a cruel smile. He was not here to offer me a choice. He was here to collect. "Give me the box, little girl," he hissed, his voice a chorus of dry leaves and splintered bone. "The warden here cannot save you. He only serves the pact. He only serves the old ways. He cannot protect the new." The young woman screamed, her body trembling with terror, and she thrust the music box into my hands. I held it, a small fragile thing that felt impossibly heavy. It was a human object, a piece of the normal world, and it was now a part of this terrifying war. My mind raced, recalling the words of Alara, the weaver. "The breacher is a tidal wave, and your little gas station, your little rules, will be swept away in the flood." The rules were for the skinwalkers, for the wardens and the weavers. They were not for this. This was a new threat.
A new kind of chaos.
The breacher's herald walked to the counter, his smile widening. "The rules are a cage, warden," he whispered. "They cannot protect you from the new chaos.
Now, give me the box, and we will let the girl live.
Refuse, and I will tear this place and her apart." I looked at the music box in my hands, then at the terrified young woman, then at the cruel, predatory smile of the breacher's herald. My rules, my pact, my entire worldview was silent. I had no weapon against this. I had no rule to follow. My choice was not between two sides, but between my code and a human life. I looked at the girl, her eyes begging me for salvation, and I knew with a horrifying certainty that my old life, my old humanity, was not yet dead. I was a journalist, a truth seeker, and I had a new terrible truth to face. My rules, my pact, my fortress of a gas station, were not enough. I was the warden of a world I didn't fully understand, and the chaos had just found a new way in. I had to choose, and I had to choose quickly, for the girl's life, and the future of my own soul depended on it.
The music box felt like a living thing in my hand, a tiny, fragile shield against the encroaching darkness.
I stared at the girl, her face a mask of pleading terror, and at the breacher's herald, whose smile promised a feast of carnage. My mind was a battlefield, a storm of clashing principles. The rules of the pact, the sacred laws of the wardens, dictated that I must not interfere with the natural order of things. This girl, this human, was not a part of that pact. She was a trespasser, a forgotten detail in an ancient contract. To save her would be to break my code, to betray my new purpose. But the old Ethan, the journalist who had fought for truth and protected the innocent, was not yet dead. He was screaming from the deepest part of my soul, a primal human scream that drowned out the whispers of the pact. I was a warden, but I was not a monster. I looked at the herald, my heart pounding in my chest, and made my choice. A choice not of the pact, but of the man. "I will not give you the box," I said, my voice shaking, but my resolve firm. The herald's smile vanished, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. He was not used to being defied. "Then you have chosen," he hissed, his form beginning to shimmer, to fragment into 1,000 dancing shadows. "You have chosen to be a man, not a warden. And for that, you will be destroyed." His form, a grotesque patchwork of bone and shadow, solidified into a towering, monstrous thing, its limbs bending at impossible angles, its face a snarling maw of jagged teeth. He lunged, a flash of motion so fast I barely registered it. The girl screamed, and I instinctively raised the music box, a futile, pathetic weapon. But the herald didn't touch me. He didn't even come close. A low, guttural growl, a sound of ancient fury, filled the gas station, and a flash of blinding white light erupted from the doorway. The warden, the man with the pale eye, stood there, his face a mask of grim determination, a small silver amulet held in his hand. The herald shrieked, a sound of pure agony, and recoiled, his form dissolving into a cloud of black smoke that swirled and dissipated in the air. The warden had saved me, but his pale eye, when it met mine, was filled with a look of profound disappointment. He walked to the counter, his movements silent and deliberate, and placed a small dark stone next to the music box. The stone was cold, heavy, and it seemed to absorb all light. "You have broken the pact, Ethan," he said, his voice a low, unyielding rumble. "The rules are a law, not a suggestion. You have chosen a life over a contract. And for that, the pact will no longer protect you. The bone compass, which had been a silent, comforting presence in my pocket, went still. Its needle, which had always trembled with a quiet internal power, was now just a dead piece of metal, pointing in no direction at all.
The connection was gone.
The pact, my shield, my law, had abandoned me. The warden picked up the music box, his long, pale fingers handling the delicate object with a strange, unsettling reverence. The human's object is a key, he said, his voice a cold, chilling whisper.
A new kind of cow. A cow born of the humanat. You chose to protect it. Now you must bear the consequence.
He turned to the young woman, who was now trembling uncontrollably, and his pale eye fixed on her. You have trespassed, he said, his voice a cold, unyielding law. The pact cannot protect you. You must leave this place and never return, or you will be lost. The girl, her eyes wide with terror, nodded frantically. She stumbled out of the gas station, her sobs a fading sound in the night. The warden, with a final disapproving glance at me, turned and walked out, his silent, powerful form disappearing into the darkness.
He was left alone again, standing behind the counter, a cold stone in my hand, and the heavy silence of a contract broken.
I had chosen a life over a law, and for that, I had been cast out. I was no longer a warden. I was a man, alone in a world of monsters, and my only defense, the pact, had abandoned me. The rules, the life I had fought to protect, were now my greatest enemy. And the breacher, the great and terrible power, was no longer waiting for a key. It was waiting for me. The silence after the warden's departure was not a relief, it was an execution. I was no longer a warden, no longer a part of the pact. I was a trespasser, a broken link in a chain of ancient law. The bone compass, my guide, my lifeline, was now a useless piece of bone and metal, a constant chilling reminder of my betrayal. I was alone. The gas station, my fortress, my sanctuary, was now a trap. The rules, the very laws I had fought to uphold, were now a set of iron bars, a cage I was trapped in. I was no longer protected. The skinwalkers, the wardens and the weavers, were no longer bound by a pact to a man who had broken their sacred law. They were free to do as they pleased, and I was their prey. The night was a terrifying, suffocating blackness.
Every shadow, every creak of the old building, every whisper of the wind, felt like a threat.
My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs, and I found myself constantly looking over my shoulder, a primal animal fear now my only companion. My journalist's notebook, my meticulous record of the pact, was now a book of prophecies, a chilling account of the end of my world. The rules, the symbols, the strange artifacts, they were no longer a key to my survival, they were a roadmap to my destruction. A low guttural growl, a sound I had heard before, echoed from the back of the store.
My blood ran cold.
It was the breacher's herald, the thing that had come for the music box, the thing I had defied. He had returned, and this time, there was no warden to save me. He emerged from the shadows, his form a towering, monstrous thing of bone and shadow. His face, a snarling maw of jagged teeth, was twisted into a cruel, triumphant smile. He was not here to offer me a choice. He was here to collect. The pact has abandoned you, warden, he hissed, his voice a chorus of dry leaves and splintered bone. You chose the chaos of the human heart over the law of the pact, and for that, you will be destroyed. He lunged, a flash of motion so fast I didn't even have time to scream. But just as his claws were about to tear into my flesh, a new sound, a different sound, filled the air.
Note à growl, but à mélodique, echoing whisper.
It was Alara, the weaver, her shawl of shadows a living thing around her. She was not alone. The collector, the man with the black stones, was with her, his face a mask of quiet determination. The pact has abandoned him, yes, Alara said, her voice a low, sibilant whisper. But he has not abandoned the truth. He has chosen to be a man, not a pawn. And for that, he is a new kind of key. A key to a new kind of pact. The herald shrieked, a sound of pure agony and fury, and turned to face them. Traitors, he hissed.
You serve the whole way. You serve the cage. The chaos is the future.
The collector, silent as always, raised his hand. A small black stone, the same kind he had given me, was clutched in his palm. The stone began to hum with a quiet, internal power, and the air around it grew impossibly cold. Ilara, her shawl of shadows a-dancing, weaving thing around her, raised her own hand. A single, forgotten memory, a fleeting image of a child's laughter, shimmered in the air above her palm. The pact is not a cage, Ilara whispered, her voice a beautiful, terrifying promise. It is a balance.
A tapestry of truth and chaos. And the human, the one who shows the path over the law, is the new thread. The one who will mend the veil. The collector and Ilara, the wardant and the weaver, the two sides of the ancient war, had united.
Not to protect the old pact, but to create a new one. A pact that included the chaos of the human heart, a pact that was born of choice, not of law. And I, Ethan Hayes, the disgraced journalist, the failed warden, was the key. I was the bridge between two worlds, the one who would either mend the veil or tear it all down. The battle for the soul of Blackwood Creek, for the soul of the world, was no longer a silent war of shadows and whispers. It was a war of truth and chaos, and I was at the very heart of it. The air in the gas station crackled with an energy I had never felt before, a fusion of two opposing forces. The cold, unyielding law of the warden and the chaotic, shifting spirit of the weaver had met, and their combined power was a tangible, humming presence. The Breacher's herald, a towering, monstrous thing of bone and shadow, recoiled from their combined assault, his shrieks of agony a testament to the new, terrifying power they wielded. He is chaos, Ilara whispered, her voice a low, sibilant song.
A force of pure destruction.
He does not understand balance. The collector, his face a mask of grim determination, raised the black stone higher. He is a disease, his voice, a deep rumbling sound I hadn't heard before, was filled with a primal earthy fury. And the only cure is a new pact. The herald shrieked, a sound of pure agony and fury, and his form began to dissolve, to fragment into a cloud of black smoke that swirled and dissipated in the air. The threat was gone for now, but the battle had just begun. Ilara and the collector turned to me, their opposing energies swirling around them. You are the key, Ethan, Ilara said, her eyes, two bottomless pools of obsidian, fixed on me.
You are the bridge between our worlds.
The one who can mend the veil. The collector nodded, his pale, chiseled face a study in grim resolve. The old pact is broken, he said. The law is no longer enough. The veil is thinning. We need a new pact, a new law, one that is born of both worlds. I stared at them, my mind reeling. A new pact? What does that mean? It means, Ilara said, her voice a low melodic whisper, that the new pact must be born of a human heart. A heart that has known both the law and the chaos. A heart that has chosen to protect a life over a law.
Heart like you.
The collector placed a small dark stone on the counter, a twin to the one he had used to fight the herald. The pact is a ritual, he said. The rules are the language. You must speak the new language. You must create the new law.
The law of the human heart.
I looked at the stone, then at the shattered remains of my old life. The compass, the silver coin, the fragments of a world I no longer belonged to. I was a journalist, a truth seeker, and I had stumbled into a war that was as old as time itself. I had failed to uphold the old law, but in doing so, I had found a new one. A law that was not of stone and bone, but of flesh and blood.
A law of compassion, of choice, of the human heart.
The gas station, my fortress, my sanctuary, was now a nexus of power. The veil was thinning, and the breacher was coming. The war was no longer a silent one of whispers and shadows. It was a war for the very soul of the world, and I, Ethan Hayes, the failed journalist, the disgraced warden, was at the very heart of it. I had to create a new pact. I had to speak the new language. I had to become a new kind of warden, a new kind of keeper, a new kind of man. The final confrontation was not at the gas station, but at the nexus, the ancient oak tree where the veil between worlds was thinnest.
Ilara and the collector had taken me there, a silent, powerful escort into the path of the forest.
The air in the clearing was thick with an ancient crackling energy, a fusion of life and death, of law and chaos. The Breacher was here. Not as a herald, not as a whisper, but as a full, terrifying presence. It was a towering, monstrous thing of pure chaos and hunger, its form a shifting, swirling vortex of bone, shadow, and shattered memories. Its voice, a chorus of 1,000 screaming souls, was a sound of pure agony and destruction. The old pact, the rigid law of the wardens, was no match for it. The rules, the language of the old law, were shattered and broken, useless against a creature of pure chaos. Ilara and the Collector stood with me, their forms shimmering with a low, constant energy. "The old pact cannot bind it, Ethan," Ilara whispered, her voice a low, melodic song. "Only a new pact, a new law, can mend the veil." I held the Collector's stone in my hand, its cold, heavy surface a comforting presence. I looked at the Breacher, at the swirling vortex of chaos, and a new kind of courage, a human courage, filled me.
I was not a skinwalker.
I was not a warden. I was a man. And my greatest weapon was not a rule, but a choice. I raised the stone, its cold surface a stark contrast to the heat of my resolve. I closed my eyes, and I spoke. Not in the language of the pact, not in the cryptic whispers of the rules, but in the language of the human heart. I spoke of the girl I had saved, of the guilt I had carried, of the love and loss that had shaped my life. I spoke of choice, of compassion, of the fragile beauty of a human soul. The stone in my hand began to hum, a deep, resonant chord that seemed to be shaking the very foundations of the world. The chaos of the Breacher seemed to falter, to recoil from the pure, unyielding power of the human heart. I opened my eyes and looked at the Breacher. "This is the new pact," I said, my voice strong, clear, and filled with a quiet, unyielding power. "The pact of the human heart.
The law of choice. The rule of compassion. This is the new law of Blackwood Creek.
And you, Breacher, are no match for it." The Breacher shrieked, a sound of pure agony and fury, and its form began to unravel. The swirling vortex of bone, shadow, and shattered memories began to tear itself apart, to dissolve into a million dancing motes of light and dark. The chaos was defeated. The veil was mended.
The clearing was silent again.
The ancient oak tree, the nexus, stood still and quiet, its branches a peaceful, sheltering canopy. Ilara and the Collector, their forms now a peaceful, shimmering presence, looked at me with a new kind of respect. "You have done it, Ethan," Ilara whispered, her voice a low, melodic song. "You have mended the veil. You have created a new pact." I looked at the stone in my hand, its cold surface now warm, and I felt a new kind of peace. My life as a journalist had ended in a lie. My new life as a warden had begun with a terrible truth. But my final act, my final choice, had created a new kind of truth.
A truth of compassion, of choice, of the human act.
I was no longer a pawn, no longer a warden. I was the keeper of the new pact, the guardian of a new kind of peace.
The story of Blackwood Creek and the story of my life had just begun.
The gas station, my fortress, my sanctuary, was now my home. The nights were no longer filled with fear, but with a quiet, watchful peace. The skinwalkers still came, the wardens and the weavers, but they were different now. They were no longer silent, menacing figures. They were customers, friends, a part of the new world, the new pact that I had helped to create. The bone compass, the old symbol of the rigid law, was now just a piece of bone and metal, a reminder of a past that was no longer mine. The new pact, the law of the human heart, was not a rule, not a compass, but a feeling, a quiet, reassuring presence in my soul. I still worked the night shift. I still served the coffee, sold the gas, and watched the stars. But I was no longer a ghost in a forgotten place. I was the keeper of a new world, the guardian of a new kind of peace. The story of Blackwood Creek and the story of me had just begun, and it was a story of hope, of choice, of the enduring power of the human heart. I was Ethan Hayes, and I was home. I was left alone again, standing behind the counter, a crumpled $2 bill lying on the floor. I had failed. I had broken a rule, a sacred pact. The fluorescent lights, which had been a comfort, flickered violently before plunging the station into a suffocating darkness. Then from the blackness, a creature of bone and shadow emerged, a monstrous skinwalker from the deepest corners of folklore, and it was looking for me.
The Bonne Compass, Jiventume by the Mysterious Woman et Lara, flared with a blinding white light, repelling the creature with a sound like a tous en belle ringignatons.
It was a temporary reprieve, not a permanent shield. The rules were not a joke, but a lifeline. They were a covenant, a delicate balance that I, in my arrogance, had almost destroyed. My life as an investigative journalist had ended in a lie, but my new life as a warden in Blackwood Creek had just begun with a terrible truth. I was no longer a spectator, I was a character in my own horror story, and the prologue had just ended. My journalistic instincts, the very thing that had ruined my old life, were now the only thing that could save my new one. I was no longer running from the truth. I was running towards it, and I had a feeling that the truth was far more terrifying than the lies I had left behind.